All right, Born to Sail. That's a series we're in. It is a series on the gospel, the good news about Jesus. And we're going to pull out some themes in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and see where they have borrowed some themes that are in the Bible of God's story of him coming to rescue his prized creation. How's that? Okay, so that's we're going to answer lots of questions. I don't want to do the same introduction every week, so if you haven't been with us, it's actually on YouTube. Actually, last week, not on YouTube. We had a sound issue, and it wasn't our sound people. That was my sound issue. I forgot to turn it on the on the computer. So we don't have that so far in Born to Sail. We started off by giving the big picture that what God is offering us salvation. He's offering us this opportunity to have relationship with him, a real relationship with him. And what this relationship, part of this, what this relationship, the benefit of it is that it frees us from the law of sin and death. And so that was kind of the gist of our first talk, that God is offering us freedom. And so it's the overview of where we're going. And so last week we started with the curse. And we answered a few of the questions that we were going to dive into about, like, how did the world get to the way it is? Why is there so much pain and suffering? Why is all this stuff happening? And we talked about sin coming into the world and the world coming under a curse. And my favorite clip in the entire Pirates of the Caribbean movies, all of them, is the one where Barbossa is explaining the curse to Elizabeth. And that was the clip that we watched last week. And so this is what he says. This is kind of the ending. This is actually where we left off, and we're going to pick up. Our next clip is actually right after he says this. And so here goes. Captain Barbossa, talking about the Aztec gold that they stole. The more we gave them away, the more we came to realize the drink would not satisfy. Food turned to ash in our mouths, and all the pleasurable company in the world could not slake our lust. We are cursed men, Miss Turner. Compelled by greed we were. But now we are consumed by it, right? That's his little speech there. And it gives us this amazing picture of what the curse entering the world did to all humans. And so it's like all of us have taken a piece of that Aztec gold, which represents sin. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. And so you can see where the movie has kind of plucked these themes out of the Bible story, right? That we are cursed. And so we talked about it a little bit last week, but this is the next part. We talked about a God promising right in the middle of the curse, that he was going to, at some point, send someone to reverse the curse. All right, so that's where we left off. And so today we're starting off, the talk is called The Code. And that's why we watched the first clip about the code. There's nothing super significant about that. There is a few snippets, but we might tackle them a little bit later. But it's just to introduce this idea of a code that even pirates, now this isn't real, it's in the story, but even pirates need some sort of code to follow. How do you know if they're pirates? Right? Like there has to be some kind of form, some sort of code so that they can actually be who they say they are. Right? And so that's the imagery that's given to us in the movie for these pirates. All right. So we're going to start off and kind of entitled this part, so this idea of the code, it's God's plan to reverse the curse. And so last week, we introduced this idea that there was a promise, that in Genesis 3, right actually in the middle, actually right near the beginning of the curse, that God says this really interesting thing, and he's talking to the serpent. And this is what he says: you, talking to the serpent, will strike his heel, and he's talking about Jesus, he was talking about the one that would come, will crush your head. And so right in the curse itself, there's a plan of redemption, a rescue plan. That there would be someone who was coming to reverse this curse. And from the moment the curse fell upon creation, God set in motion that plan, a rescue plan, to rescue us from the curse. And then we see that this promise in the Old Testament, all these stories in the beginning of the Old Testament, well, they're all leading up to a certain point. They're all eventually leading to Jesus. But as they go along, there's this promise is repeated. Repeated to Noah, different form, but God makes a covenant with Noah. He makes a promise with Noah. And then Abraham. Now, if you don't know who Abraham was, I'm going to explain a little bit. So Abraham was this dude who was living apart from God. He may have been worshiping idols. I don't know. It doesn't really say. But what it does say is that God spoke to Abraham and called him out of where he was living. Now that must have been interesting. Remember, there's no Bibles. There's nothing to read about this God. It's only by word of mouth. If your ancestors forgot about him, then you didn't know about him. There's nothing written down. And so Abraham, it would have been like, what? This God is actually talking to him. Like, this never happens. And calls him out. And so he does it. He follows him. And so what we have is, so God decides, or he's already decided, but he's chosen Abraham to be the father of his people. That he's going to choose a people for himself, not just choose, but then create a people for himself. And the whole story of Abraham, you see all this struggle with Abraham is not able to produce a line. Like, he doesn't have any sons. Doesn't have any kids. So he tries to fix it himself and he messes it up. And then we have what the New Testament calls the child of promise is born. And through divine, God actually, when Abraham's super old, it's like 100, right? In fact, his wife was like 90 laughs about when God says that she's going to be with child. She's like way past childbearing age, even back then, right? And she laughs. And so we see a miracle of God because, God isn't just kind of making this random choice. He's putting it all together. It's all part of this plan that God has to rescue people from the curse. And so what does he say to Abraham? He says that there's going to be someone who comes in your line, one of your descendants, who is going to be a blessing to all the nations. Again, referring to Jesus. That eventually through Abraham's line, there would come one who'd be able to reverse the curse. And so this is a chosen people. So this is kind of God's next part of his plan, is choosing a people of promise, or a people for himself. Well, fast forward a few years, and we go through the whole history. It would take a really long time because there's a lot of history there. Fast forward, his people have increased greatly in number. They are now called Israel, after Jacob was renamed to Israel, which Jacob was the grandson of Abraham. Renames them Israel, and Israel gets enslaved by the Egyptians. And it's like 400 years. And then God sends a dude named Moses to deliver them. And so Moses goes in, big story, there's plagues, there's all sorts of stuff. And it's very obvious that it's not Moses who's delivering the people, it's God, like super obvious. And he's doing it through this guy named Moses. And he delivers his people out of slavery, catching some themes here from our first talk, out of slavery into freedom. And so what we see with God rescuing Israel back in that early time is a foreshadow of what God was about to do. He's kind of going like, hey guys, you guys know what foreshadowing is in a book? Like when they're giving you kind of hints to what's coming. Well, this is totally one of those. He's showing us this is what's going to happen. That people are going to be delivered from slavery. And it's the slavery to sin and death that they're going to be delivered from. Well, they get out. Lots of amazing thing happens. Like they cross the Red Sea on dry land. You know, God, this is amazing. Of course, again, it's because God is doing it. It's not by men. And so the people gather and they're in front of this mountain and it's smoking and quaking, as what we find in both Deuteronomy chapter 5 and Exodus chapter 20. And God makes a covenant with the people. It's not a contract, it's a covenant because it's based in love. God has chosen for himself a people to love on. That's what he wants to do. He wants to be with his creation and has from the beginning. That's the motivation for reversing the curse. And so he wants to be with his people, makes a covenant. And then he gives them the law that we know in the Old Testament. And many of you may have wondered, like, what in the world is that law doing here? Well, we're going to hit that a little bit today, and hopefully it'll give you a little bit of a taste and why the law. But to kind of do a big kind of sum up, in order to be in relationship with God, there's certain things that had to come into place. And God's desire, remember, it's based on love, covenant's based on love. God's desire for his people was to be in relationship with him and each other. And so when we look into the Old Testament, we see all these laws. Yeah, some of them are really hard to understand. It's like, why that one? Well, you got to do your homework and do some studying, but they all fit in some way in order for us to be in right relationship with God and right relationship with other people. Now, one of the big things here is you could say, well, why so many laws? There's so many. There's over 600 laws in there. Well, one of the things that at least I think that God is doing here is showing how difficult it is to be in relationship without him or with him without somehow, some way providing a way for him to come to us. Because in some ways, just trying to obey all the laws so you can be in right relationship with God and do all the right sacrifices, there's still something missing. And so I think that's what the law is meant to do. Is it's like, this is really difficult because of the curse. See, the law did not reverse the curse. It just showed people how to live and flourish. So if they lived in relationship with God and loved him and obeyed him, they would flourish. Because then they would be in right relationship with each other. They would do the right things with each other. And so this is what we call the law in the Old Testament, and our word for it today is the code. To be in right relationship with God, so it's not only these relationships and these laws, there also has to be some sort of atonement for sin. There has to be forgiveness offered. And the Bible says that there's no forgiveness of sin without the shedding of blood. Now, we catch that theme in the Pirates of the Caribbean, did we not? Right? It's definitely in there, and we're gonna find out from our next clip, exactly how that goes. But before we get there, I want to go to the 10 Commandments just to kind of give you an overview. We're not going to read the whole thing. There's 10 commandments. I took them out of Exodus 20. They're also in Deuteronomy chapter 5. The one thing about Deuteronomy is that in Deuteronomy in chapter 6, it kind of gives you the heart between why God has given these rules and these laws to begin with. And so you'll notice that the first 4 commandments center on our relationship with God. So no other gods before God, right? He's like, I'm the real God. Anything else that you want to chase after doesn't measure up to me. And so don't try. So that's the first rule. The second is don't worship idols and images. Don't worship created things. And don't make, so, a lot of the idols, and in our culture, we don't have like necessarily something that's carved and then we bow down to it, right? Our idol worship is a lot different. It's more in the things of the mind, ideals and desires that we chase after rather than God. And so this is this idea, okay, so to be in right relationship with me, I have to actually be your God. You can't choose another God, which kind of puts us in a pickle because it's like, oh, we have to have a God? And we find out later in the New Testament, it's like, oh, okay, especially in Romans chapter 1, that created things are the most, alluring other gods that we want to chase after. It's actually the things that God provides and has created rather than himself, the creator. And so he said, this is going to be an issue. Otherwise, it wouldn't be part of the Big Ten, right? And then he says, don't misuse my name. Okay, number 3. I guess I can't explain them all. I just want to give you kind of that sense. And he says, I phrase it like this: take a day off. Because we often think about God's laws as oppressive or like so hard or restrictive. One of the laws is like, stop working so hard. Take a day off, right? And in doing that, what you'll do is you'll help restore this relationship that we're supposed to have, that I'm actually supposed to be your God, not your work, not the stuff that you can buy with the money that you get from work or whatever. He's just like, take a day off. Sounds like pretty hard God, right? Yeah, we don't often think about Sabbath like that, like take some time off. Don't work so hard. But it's a day to remember that God is God, that he's the one we desire the most. Okay, so the next ones are 5 through 9 are how we treat each other, right? How to be in relationship with other people. And it's the bare minimum on how to love someone. So he starts it off. So if you're going to have right relationship with other people, he starts it off with your parents. Honor your mom and dad. That's where he begins. That's the first one when it comes to how do you have good relationships with other people. He starts there. That's where it begins. Honor your mom and your dad. Then he goes, don't murder people. Okay? The bare minimum and how to love somebody is don't kill them. That's probably a good one. And then don't lust after people. Don't treat other people like they're objects. They're created in the image of God. That God has a place for the desires that he's given us. And lust is those strong desires that we try to fulfill outside of the design that God's given us. Okay, so after that he goes, don't steal, right? Don't take other people's stuff. And then he says, don't lie, right? Lying is not good. If you're going to have good relationships with other people, you can't kill them, right? You can't treat them as objects and lust after them. You can't steal from them. You can't lie to them. Like, is that going to create good relationships? Come on, feedback. Right? Is this pretty basic on how to live with other people? Yeah. And then the last commandment, number 10, is an inside thing. Because this may not come out in people that you're coveting, means that you want what they have. They may not even know that, right? but it'll come out in different ways. But don't covet. So that's kind of the guidelines for this moral code that he's given his people. You want to live in right relationship with me, here's how you do it. If you want to live in right relationship with each other, here's the base, right? He didn't give us lofty, lofty things. Here's the lowest way that you can do it. If you just follow these lowest things, you'll have good relationships with other people. Isn't that amazing? Well, because God's amazing, right? He gives us kind of the low bar and goes like, just do this. You'll actually have good relationships. You treat them just like you honor your parents. You will honor them, right? That's why he starts with honor your parents. Okay, so that's the 10 Commandments. He's teaching his people how to live in relationship with him and relationship with others and to watch out in the inner life, right? Covetousness is kind of that big thing inside. All right, let's keep going. So we have a promise. We have a people that God's chosen, all part of this plan, but we have a problem because the law cannot save us. It could never save us. You see, well, fast forward. Remember, we kind of stopped at God creating himself a people and Moses' deliverance and the covenant and the commandments. Shoot forward a lot of years to the first century. And Jesus is now a man and he's doing ministry. And what we find is by the time he came along, the people were believing that salvation, in order to be saved, that God's rescue plan was just them doing the rules. Right? If they just did all the right rules, if they just obeyed, then their relationship with God was good. That they were good people because they obeyed the rules. But we find, and this is what we're going to talk about next week, that didn't cut it. That the law, that God gave us the law, he didn't give it to save us. Because obeying the law could never make us in right relationship. Because think about this. What does obedience do to disobedience or rebellion in our hearts? Nothing, right? It doesn't. It's not like this, okay, I did some good stuff, bad stuff. Oh, that was bad. Oh, I did a bunch of good stuff. It doesn't work like that. Nothing works like that. Right? As long as you do enough good stuff, you're okay. No. And we're going to find out next week that Jesus totally gets into that. You think you're a good person because you've done some good things. What about the sin? What about the curse? Because the curse is a weight that all your good works, no matter how many good things you did, the curse is too heavy, and your debt of sin and rebellion against God is too big. There is no way that just obeying a few rules is going to fix that. This is how Paul says it. And this is in Romans chapter 3. Obviously, the law applies to those in whom it was given. Remember the clip from the Pirates? When Barbossa's like talking to Elizabeth and he's like, well, besides, in order for the pirate code to actually mean anything to you, you have to be a pirate. Okay, so that's the imagery we got here. The law applies to those whom it was given. For its purpose is, get this, why did God have the law? Why did he make the law? Its purpose is to keep people from having excuses. What? And to show that the entire world is guilty before God. That's what the code does. That's what the law does. It shows us that we're all guilty, right? That we've all sinned. The passage that we talked about last week in your small groups. We've all sinned. No one is righteous, not even one. For no one can be made right with God by doing what the law commands. Meaning, simply by obeying the rules does not make you right with God. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. That's the purpose of the law. And so we're going to watch the clip. I've got just a couple things to say about it and what we've been talking about the code. And then we're going to go to small group. So just to set up this clip. This is the continuation. I mentioned it earlier. This is the continuation of the clip that we were watching about the Aztec gold on the Black Pearl with Captain Barbosa and Elizabeth. So Elizabeth has been listening to Barbosa talk to her about this Aztec gold and the curse. He's just told her we are cursed men. That's where we're going to pick it up. There's one more thing. Now Barbosa goes into explaining or explains why they've taken her. Remember in the clip, they pull out. They don't throw her off overboard or nothing. They keep her. And if you noticed, when she said that her name was Elizabeth Turner, which is not her name, they were like, "Oh, Turner." And then two of the parts are like, "Oh, Bootstrap." Right? There's something significant in this name. And so they don't throw her overboard. And she's like, "Hey, aren't you going to take me back?" And they're like, "Nope." And that wasn't part of the deal, right? And so in this clip, she's still on the ship. We're finishing this conversation. And a couple of things to watch out for. There's one way that the curse can be lifted or atoned for. I think they actually use that language later in the movie. If all the gold pieces are returned and the blood repaid. All right. That is an interesting clip. But I hope you guys noticed a few things. And in case you didn't, I'm going to explain them. So we just talked about that the law, it was meant to reveal. It was meant to reveal the sin, right? And so the purpose of the law is like the moonlight in this clip. It shows us for what we really are. That's what the law does. It exposes that all of us are sinners. That's why in our passage there was like no excuses, because we're all sinners. We've all sinned. And so the law exposes us for who we are. And it reveals, or because it reveals what sin actually is. All right. So you guys know what an MRI machine is? Yeah? Magnetic resonating imagery. I've actually had one. Now I can't remember those are the words, but something like that, right? So what happens when you go into an MRI machine is that it sees everything and tells you what's wrong with you. And so, I busted my ankle up really bad when I was playing basketball in college. And so they sent me to get an MRI. And so it was bad. But it could see all the problems. But you know what the MRI did not do for me? Fix my ankle. All that machine could do is show me what was wrong. You guys, that's why we have the law. That's why the law was given. It shows us what's wrong. And so this is why we have this really big problem. If that's where God's salvation plan ended, we have a huge problem. Because the MRI, the law, the moonlight can't change who we are. It can't fix our brokenness. It can't lift the curse. It has no power to cure us. So as important as an MRI machine is, it can't fix us. It can't cure whatever the problem is. And that's the law. That's also next week's talk. It's called The Cure. So we're going to leave it there. I'm going to give you hope because I don't want you just to leave go like, wow, the code, that's it? There's no hope. There is hope. It's part of the plan. It's part of the story. You see, being a good person or obeying God's rules cannot save us because God did not want to simply atone for sin. He wants to be in right relationship with us. He wants to completely reverse the curse. Since the code could not do this, right, the law, but could only reveal what is wrong and reveal sin, the next step in God's plan was to send the cure. And so that's next week. We're going to talk about the cure and how Jesus, who is the cure, by the way, spoiler alert, fits the role and how he can do what the law cannot.